On behalf of the House Democratic Caucus, I want to thank the members of the press for being here on this very first day of a special session. In my 11 years here at the state capitol, this is the first truly special session that I have been a participant in. And as we kick things off today, we wanted to come and sort of update the public, try to add some transparency to this process, let the citizens of this great state know how the budget negotiations are proceeding. Earlier this morning, I had an hour-long meeting with the governor and her staff, along with Minority Leader John Sparks from Norman. We had a constructive conversation, and as a matter of fact, over the last 4 weeks, our conversations have been very constructive, kicking around ideas of not just a cigarette tax, which we have said all along can be part of an overall solution, but isn't the solution in and of itself, that we've got to find additional revenue so that we can reinvest in education, healthcare, and public safety. And so our caucus has been calling for an increase in the gross production tax. We talked about that this morning. Our caucus has been calling for restoring income tax cuts on high earners. We had a nice conversation around that this morning. The governor's office kicked around a few other ideas that they would like to see us consider. And so the conversations are continuing. Unfortunately, as we sit here on the first day of the special session, we essentially know what the governor would like us to do, at least the parameters. Our House Democratic Caucus has put out our Restoring Oklahoma plan, laying out an income tax restoration, gross production tax, a cigarette tax, and some tax credits that we think ought to go away. We've laid out our plan, but here we are the first day of this special session, spending $30,000 a day of the taxpayers' money, and we still don't know what the House Republicans want us to do. We don't know what their plan is. All they've offered up is an increase in the cigarette tax, which we've said all along won't solve the problems facing this state. And so while the governor and I will continue our negotiations and discussions even tomorrow morning and for the rest of this week, we hope that the House Republicans will join us in a bipartisan effort to come up with real solutions, more than just a cigarette tax Band-Aid on a bullet hole, but find real solutions to increase important recurring revenues so that we can honor the will of our constituents that we've heard loud and clear, who've said you've got to find revenue for teacher pay, for health care, and principally they've said you've got to find that revenue in an increase in the gross production tax. Our caucus, our members have heard our constituents, and we continue to negotiate in good faith around that very issue with the governor, and we're waiting on the House Republicans to join us. We've talked about the tobacco tax being at $1.50, and around gross production tax, we've said all along that we think it ought to be at 7%. That's what it was from the early 1970s until just a few years ago. But we said we're willing to compromise, and we said we'd compromise around a 5% number, and we even said if they didn't want to go to 5%, that we could adjust the monthly rate and maybe look at something like 4% for the first year, then go up to 7% after that. Or go to 4.5% for the first 18 months, and then go up to 7% after that. And so we're in those negotiations, and the governor has been warm to some of those talks. We've not found a sweet spot yet around which we can all agree, but the conversations have been proceeding nicely. For the citizens who may be watching this at home, trying to get transparency not just in the negotiating process, but also just in how the legislative process works, in order for a bill to be heard on the floor of the House of Representatives, by Constitution, it has to have been at least read 3 times before it can be voted on. So today, Monday, a bill is considered to be first read. So we introduced legislation today, my office did, that would raise the gross production tax back up to 7%, would allow for a vote of the people to do that very thing as well if they so desired. But today it's been first read. Tomorrow we'll gavel in, and it'll be a very short day, much like today, in which all the bills will be considered second read. And then then Wednesday, we'll come in and actually have an opportunity to vote on them after third reading. And that's when most of the action will happen on the House floor. And then from there, any bills that pass out of the House, Wednesday will be considered first read in the Senate Wednesday, second read Thursday, and then they can vote on them, at least theoretically, Friday, and then sent to the governor's desk that day. So we've offered up revenue solutions. What we did is we essentially took the main components of our Restoring Oklahoma plan, restoring income tax cuts on high earners, and restoring the gross production tax back up to 7%. We've introduced bills that would do that very thing. We've also introduced a bill, a compromise bill, to raise it to 5%. We've said all along it should be 7%, but if the House Republicans don't want to go all the way to 7%, even though that's what our constituents are all calling on us to do, we've said we would be willing to accept 5%, and so I've introduced legislation that would do that as well. If we can find a way to strike a compromise, if the House Republicans will meet us halfway and honor the will of our constituents to raise the gross production tax to at least 5%, if they will meet us halfway, then we can be done by Friday. However, if the House Republicans choose not to put additional revenue on the table, if all they want to do is vote for a cigarette tax, which won't do anything to help a teacher pay raise, won't do anything to help a state employee pay raise, won't pave one new road. If that's all they want to do, then my gut tells me, as well as the head counts tell me, that they don't have enough Republicans in their caucus to pass the cigarette tax as it is. And so therefore, if it fails, there's a chance that the governor could gavel us out of special session and say, let's go back until the House Republicans come to the table with a compromise, and then come back into special session after that. So that way we're not wasting $30,000 a day. So there's a decent chance that special session could end Wednesday if the House Republicans don't meet us halfway. They offered us 5% at the end of last session. If they'll come back to that, or say offer us 4% for the first 12 months, or 4.5% for the first 18 months, if they'll compromise instead of just saying, no, we're not going to move on GPT, if they'll do that, then we'll do that and the cigarette tax and be done with special session. Or if they would compromise around an income tax, restore some income tax cuts on high earners, then we would be willing to help them. And we've been in those negotiations with the governor for weeks, and she's willing to have that conversation. So far, anytime that we've had that conversation between the governor and myself, and then they've taken our ideas back to the House Republicans, they've been dismissed out of hand by their leadership, not by their rank and file members, but by their leadership. And so we've said it all along, the cigarette tax isn't enough. That won't solve the problem. And we've got to have more recurring revenue on the table. And right now we're waiting to hear from the House Republicans what that revenue is. For example, if you go from a 2% GPT today to a 5% gross production tax, if you did it on all wells, that could mean up to $300 million in this environment. As the price of oil increases, that number only goes higher over time. But you put that together with a $250 million cigarette tax, and that goes a long way to helping us dig out of this mess. But as it currently sits, if they want to do a GPT just on new wells, that may mean between $12 to $20 million, which isn't a lot. But our caucus is willing to compromise, meet them halfway, and say, if you don't want to raise it on all wells, well, then we'll do it just on new wells, knowing that in the next few years, as more wells come online with long laterals and horizontal drilling, that the state will benefit from it. And so we're willing to help support an increase in the cigarette tax today for the long-term benefit of the state of raising the gross production tax to 5%. What we're asking the Speaker to do is to say, we'll help you get that teacher pay raise done, but we've got to have revenue. We think that revenue can come from a restoring of the income tax or restoring the gross production tax back up to 7%. So far, it appears that they continue to play games with teachers' emotions by saying, we care about a teacher pay raise, but they never put the money on the floor to pay for it. They didn't do it last session, and so far to date, we've not seen it in any bills that they filed in this special session. Best case scenario is that we can be done on Friday. They'd have to leave the desk open all of next week if we find a way to raise some revenue, because the Constitution says you can't raise revenue in the last 5 days of session, and so they essentially would get all of it done and passed by this Friday, and then leave the desk open for the next 5 days until next Friday, a week from now, and they would gavel out then. But I think the most efficient and effective way to do this is to strike a deal, get a grand bargain done, a bipartisan compromise that honors the will of our constituents on gross production taxes as well as cigarette taxes and other revenue measures, and vote on it Wednesday, let the Senate vote on it Friday, let the governor sign it Friday, and be done with the people's business and go back home. If for some reason the House Republicans choose not to compromise and choose not to honor the will of their constituents by raising the gross production tax or restoring income taxes on high earners, if all they do is stick to their guns on the cigarette tax, well, then that more than likely will fail, because I don't think the Speaker's got enough votes in his caucus to pass it. We have said we will offer ample votes from our caucus to help him get the cigarette tax passed, even as a standalone measure, if he can lead his caucus to do the right thing. It doesn't look like he will. He had about 20 no votes last time, which are well more than what we had voting no last time, and he couldn't convince his own members to vote for it. If that happens again, there's no reason for us to spend $30,000 a day waiting for the House Republicans to come to their senses and negotiate with us. So what I think you do at that point is you recess the special session to where you're not spending the money, but you recess and you leave it open for however many days it takes for the House Republicans to find their willingness to compromise. And once that's happened, then you gavel back in and get it done. Could that look at like 2 weeks worth of a recess? Maybe. It's been done that way in the past. It doesn't spend the taxpayers' dollars the way that being here every day would. But that certainly is a possibility. We've said we would support a cigarette tax if they would raise a gross production tax. We've said that we would be willing to entertain a fuel tax if it would be part of a package that, say, restored income tax cuts on high earners. And so we are absolutely supportive of a grand bargain, as long as they're just not raising taxes on middle-class families and asking wealthy folks to not contribute their fair share. So yes, we are willing to have that conversation if it's part of a grand bargain. That has been part of the discussions. But if you saw the Senate Republicans' plan, and I appreciate them at least offering something up, their plan essentially was about $450 million worth of tax increases on middle-class families, while asking the oil and gas industry and high earners to not contribute anything else to this budget. And they have been the ones that have benefited from these deep tax cuts over the last decade, not smokers and working families who drive to work and to church every day.